Okay. So if you caught that very brief introduction, I decided to be silly um, today, and as a shout out to um, Grime Slime TV, I think that's the name, right? Yeah, Grind. Grind Slime TV. And I should say, shout out Grind Slime TV. He's a friend of Greyhorn Pagans, and he does obscenely underground extreme metal album reviews with hard copy material like cassette and such. Um, and I was looking through his list, and I said, "Ooh, he has um, some sort of anti-capitalist grindcore. I'm gonna put it on my playlist for this Saul." So that was called Popular Uprising off of Last Days of Capitalism. Okay, so welcome to the show, everybody. Let me see here. Let me get myself up and pop out the chat room. I didn't blast this out, and you know what? I'm fine. People will show up if they want to show up. This is one where I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to go for about 90 minutes or so. I want to wrap up around 5 o'clock. I'm expecting company. So, we're going to pick up right here for a low-income group. Oh, and by the way, in case you didn't notice, I'm very excited. Unless I get put to work by Wednesday, I will have 2 p.m. Eastern Time this Wednesday, Dana Duda, Rotting Jewels. We're going to talk all about the connective tissue between all the big government stuff and all the on-the-ground human sacrifice stuff going on, and other crimes, intrigues, and terrible tastes in music and sexual appetites. um, anyway, for a low-income group, shopping is a time-consuming experience. For economy, means everything. This would mean that every counter would be occupied by potential customers, carefully examining the quality of merchandise and asking, say, at the shirt counter about the material, color, style, cuffs, collars, and price. As the group occupying the clerk's attention around the shirt counters moved to the underwear section, those at the underwear section would replace them at the shirt counter, and the personnel of the store would be constantly occupied. Now, pause to examine the tactic. It is legal. There is no sit-in or unlawful occupation of premises. Some thousands of people are in the store shopping, quote-unquote. The people are powerless, and you are operating within the law. This operation, well, you're not operating within the law because the jurisdiction is within respects to private property. You're on private property that is open to the public, right? There is a public standard, but it is also not the place for disruption. Now, we go soft on disruption because we do have a protest culture. But we've also seen that these demonstrations, they get belligerent, they get arrogant, they get assaulting. Remember, there's assault charges do not have to involve touching. Assault charges involve squaring up and approaching. That's assault, right? This is targeting and posturing. You know, have you raised your fist in anger? There are details that legally qualify for assault, and you don't have to touch a soul. And an assault, unless it's on a federal officer, is a misdemeanor typically. I think. Or it's a very light. Look, you're lucky if you were charged with mere assault. I have gotten in trouble for mere assault as a child. And thank God, I had a real weird psycho moment that it was better that the shit got scared out of me because whoa. What? Yeah. So anyway, for a low-income group, shopping is a time-consuming experience. For economy means everything. This would mean that every counter would be occupied by potential customers. Carefully examining the quality of merchandise and asking, say, at the shirt counter about the material, color, style, cuffs, collars, price. I'm sorry, I read all that. I'm doing the stupid thing. Now, pause to examine the tactic. It is legal. There is no sit-in or unlawful occupation of premise. Some thousands of people are in the store shopping. The police are powerless. You are operating within the law. This operation would go on until an hour before closing time, when the group would begin purchasing everything in sight to be delivered COD. To be delivered on demand, something on demand, cash on demand. This would tie up truck delivery services for at least 2 days, with obvious further heavy financial costs since all the merchandise would be refused at the time of delivery. Yeah, that never happens. That that has never happened to the extent of being an effective protesting problem. It's just another irritating day at the job, man. That's all you're doing is making an irritating day at the job. It's practically a minor inconvenience. You're gumming up the works. Saul, what are you telling people to do with their time? Come on, Saul. Seriously. Seriously. Really? That's like, okay, whatever. You're flash mobbing. You're teaching people how to do a flash mob. Whoop-de-fucking-do. That's all you're doing. You're teaching people how to flash mob. All right? We've been seeing the product of the flash mob now for several years. A very long time of flash mobs. It was a very interesting and wild phenomenon. It can be a little, you can get a little disoriented because all of a sudden you just think you're doing a thing like walking around like a fairground, just a random ass crowd of people, and then all of a sudden just some random guy in the crowd starts performing and you're like, okay, cool, there's a guy performing. And then another stranger just pops out of nowhere, starts performing, and there's choreography, and it's not just, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know it, you're surrounded by there's a whole event happening now, right? And it's cool, but also we've also seen this in horror movies happen with a terrifying purpose, right? So because it is very interesting, because it comes across with the original flash mobs, which I think was like in the early 2000s or something. You know, It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, except they're just here to make you laugh and then they disappear. Or something like that. You know, they take a bow after the performance and then whatever. And so, you know, the flash mob is also a lesson in, you know, like, you don't know who's part of a secret organization just walking by. You're on a crowded street out in a public place. Nah, you know, there's some people that for some weird reason are out to get you. Maybe they just want the coat that you're wearing. And you think one guy is trying to kill you all of a sudden. But then for some strange reason, it seems like everybody is looking away. And it doesn't make any sense why everybody is looking away. Like, something crazy just happened. Why is everybody looking away? Wouldn't everybody want to pay attention? Wouldn't they want to have situational awareness? Did they not just realize that there's a man under assault? There's it's attempted murder right now, but it's about to become murder right here in the street. And then as you're dying, you notice that fucking 12, 13 people were part of his team just running distractions from decent human beings that would have evoked their inner do the right thing complex, and they would have fashioned themselves into a mob and saved the day because you just look like an innocent guy, and, you know, that ain't right. We do things by fucking talking about what wrong may have been done. You don't have a right to kill somebody in public. Right? If you're stupid enough to wrong somebody and think that you're safe in private, I mean, just, you know, don't be a fool, right? So here you are in public, and that's horrifying. That's a horrifying idea. Right? You know, like you know, the twist in the crime drama where the guy finds out that, you know, you can't call the police. We are the police. Anyway, these stool pigeons are invaluable as trustworthy lines of communication to the establishment. With all plans ready to go, we began formation of a series of committees. A transportation committee to get the buses, a mobilization committee to work with the ministers to get their people to their buses, and other committees with other specific functions. Two of the key committees deliberately included one of these stoolies. Alright, hold on. Why is my mouse just... What's going on here? Why is the mouse not moving? Okay. Did the mouse literally just die in real time? I don't know if I've got functioning... These might be functioning AAA batteries. I'm going to change the batteries real quick. Come on. Ugh. Okay. Each so that there would be one to back up the other. We know the plan. Oh, is it just one battery? Yeah, it's just one. Alright. Hang on. Is that it? I put it in backwards, didn't I? There it is. Alright. That's better. Okay, we knew the plan would be quickly reported back to the department store. The next day, we received a call from the department store for a meeting to discuss new personnel policies and an urgent request that the meeting take place within the next 2 or 3 days, certainly before Saturday. The personnel policies of the store were drastically changed. Overnight, 186 new jobs were opened. For the first time, blacks were on the sales floor and in executive training. This is the kind of tactic that can be used by the middle class to organized shopping, wholesale buying plus charging and returning everything on delivery. Would add accounting costs to their attack on the retailer with the ominous threat of continued repetition. This is far more effective than canceling a charge account. Let's look at the scores. Sales for one day are completely shot. Delivery service is tied up for 2 days or more, and the accounting department is screwed up. The total cost is a nightmare for any retailer, and the sword remains hanging over his head. Now, we're talking about 1971. We're talking about post-civil rights, and he's talking about getting jobs for minorities here, right? So, he is trying, like, this is fascism. Coercion, this is coercion. These tactics are, it's just like, hire me or this madness continues. And this is part of when civil rights started migrating into quota. And this is because we lied to ourselves about the cognitive direction of the choices being made by many peoples in the process of trying to govern people we don't understand. And we ask ourselves, what really was going on where it was so hard, even amongst persons of color in the North, to be getting along all right. Right? There was a lot of soft segregation in the North, and we lie to ourselves a whole lot about how much space we need for our own kind, because we're perfectly comfortable intermixing in the marketplace, but we kind of want to have our neighborhood, and do not insult us by policying our neighborhood into a ghetto, which is an insult to us having a place for our culture and a place where people can come and hang out with our culture. Just like we'd love to go hang out with yours, but we have to actually have our cultures in order to share our cultures. So you also have to allow people to have their thing. You want all the white people in the world to have white-only siestas? With white people tacos and white people burritos? I didn't think so. The middle class, too, must learn the nature of the enemy and be able to practice what I have described as mass jujitsu, utilizing the power of one part of the power structure against another part. Once we understand the external reactions of the haves to the challenges of the have-nots, then we go to the next level of examination, the anatomy of power of the haves among themselves. But let us go deeper into the psyche of this Goliath. The haves possess, and in turn are possessed by power. Maybe. I mean, odds are we're talking about, yes, because we're talking about people that want one kind of government fighting people that want another kind of government. You know, Saul is definitely trapped in these fallacies as well, right? I would never do what Saul does because I do not condone fighting for the nanny state. He's fighting for the nanny state in many respects because this is all about forcing them to lower their standards instead of for those who already have their rights to raise their standards. It's about class destruction, not racial equality. It's about ignoring the merit of a thing. You'll notice here that never once does he talk about, well, what are the abilities of these people? What are the talents of these people? Right? What are the qualifications? Right? He's just saying that it's because of who they are. He's telling you to assume that they're already qualified. But that's just not true because not every white guy is going to be qualified for the situation you want to be in. And part and parcel of the process, especially if you want to fight to be more a part of your country, is sharing more of who you are in your world to people so people understand it better and it's not completely fucking alien. Right? Obsessed with the fear of losing power, their every move is dictated by the idea of keeping it. The way of life of the haves is to keep what they have and wherever possible to shore up their defenses. Right? And so, if he is thinking that doing this without becoming the haves is going to be part of the ends that he is running these means by, then he is teaching you how to be a parasite because you want to feed off of the thing. And the thing is not able to sustain itself, and you assume that it will be sustained existentially. And it's just a question of whether you believe what I just said right there, that it will not be sustained existentially, right? Most people that want to say doing something an economic way will or won't work is mostly because they're trying to sabotage it, right? If somebody's attitude is forthrightly with spite for the whole of our economic system, then they're always going to dismiss the economic system and let it just print money if it's wrong. Just give the people what they need so that way we can be responsible for whether you live or die. Why do people want responsibility over life and death? That's why I oppose SNAP. I don't have responsibility over your life and death, bro. That's tyranny. If you need to die, if you need to be sick, if you need to starve, if that's what you're looking for, I can't take that away from you. You just have to understand the consequences of your actions. Look at it straight in the face. Because you're not communicating with us. You're growling like monsters. Expecting us to fucking just learn Ebonics or something. It's insulting, man. You've been debasing yourself for years. And we're just trying really hard to say, raise your standards. Which, maybe that's a noble moment of fascism. Maybe you need to fashion yourself. I fascised myself. 5 years ago, I was not this, because I did not put any fascism on myself. I put fascism on myself for this. I wouldn't wish to put fascism on anybody. But I do recommend you put fascism on yourself. And only yourself. And to let those that can't or won't be. But also tell them, you cannot devour me because you cannot attain your own sustenance. You have a personal responsibility to yourself. If you've got a problem, you need to talk about it. Maybe you just need to admit you need psychiatric help. And let's make sure we're not putting you in a 1950s horror movie. Anyway. This opens a new vista. Not only do we have a whole class determined to keep its power and constant conflict with the have-nots, at the same time, they are in conflict among themselves. Power is not static. It cannot be frozen and preserved like food. It must grow or die. Therefore, in order to keep power, the status quo must get more. But from whom? There is just so much more than can be squeezed out of the have-nots. So the haves must take it from each other. They are on a road from which there is no turning back. Okay, so this is interesting, right? Because he is saying that the haves are devouring themselves in the Ouroboros. Which is odd to say, right? It's just, you're always looking at it, and it's just like people, like, they're, okay, we maybe had a very serious homeless problem in the 1970s. And there's a cruelty, there's a double level of cruelty, right, when a generation passes and does its thing. Right? One side goes over the top on the cultural emphasis of the policies in government, and then a big part of the country resents it, and then the side that ends up losing the argument doesn't understand what's happening and why it's going on. Right? The left were gung-ho to be a certain kind of people and say America's a certain kind of thing. And then they couldn't adjust for that in practical terms, as they were asking for all Americans to be as weak as them, and they're complaining that the people that are stronger than them don't agree with them. And they've abandoned all of their own potential. It's not that you need to be stronger than someone else to get what you think you know is right. But your strength is part of how you are standing here. And you're lying to yourself if you don't think you need it to hold an idea. Because I can't tell you how many arguments I get in on the internet, and my nervous system acts like I'm actually fighting someone right in front of me. It feels like I'm in a fist fight. And my reptilian needs to satiate that. Because trolls like to provoke the dragon. And that is because they enjoy when you fall for it. But what they hate is when you double down on them. This is something I've been trying to tell people. Okay. So I've definitely... Good, the mic's been on. I was hoping that I didn't screw that up. Alright, it's been about a half an hour. Let's run a little break. I've just got some classic punk playlist here, and I'm just going to pick something I don't think I've listened to. Where was this? I saw some good stuff. I was thinking about maybe that one. All right, we're gonna do some Agent Orange, Bloodstains. Alright, we're back. I'm just keeping things smooth and streamlined, and Tim Timoney is here. What's up, Tim? Alright. This power cannibalism of the haves permits only temporary truces, and only when equally confronted by a common enemy. Even then, there are regular breaks in the ranks, as individual units attempt to exploit the general threat for their own special benefit. Here is the vulnerable belly of the status quo. There's a little bit of that's kind of like, agents in the Matrix. He's kind of like poking the agents, right? He's playing with the agents. But he demonstrates that he does not truly know the nature of the beast. But he does kind of understand that it's at least a psychic battle, if not a spiritual one. I first learned this lesson during the 1930s Depression, when the United States experienced a revolutionary upheaval in the form of a mass labor union organization drive known as the CIO. This was the radical wing of the labor movement. It espoused industrial unionism, while the conservative and archaic AF of L clung to craft unionism. The position of the AF of L excluded the masses of workers from union organization. The battle cry of the CIO was organize the unorganized. Very quickly, the issue was joined with the gargantuan automobile industry, which was at that time an open shop and completely unorganized. The first attack was against the behemoth of this empire, General Motors. A sit-down strike was launched against Chevrolet. John Lewis, then the leader of the CIO, told me that at the height of this sit-down strike, he heard a rumor that General Motors had met with both Ford and Chrysler to advance the following position. John Lewis, that would be the congressman. He passed away some time ago. He made a major ass of himself a couple of times in Congress. They did that whole sit-in thing when Obama was president, and I think they were trying to pass a gun control bill or something like that. It was the most insane thing I had ever seen. I'd never seen the Democrats as an elected, dignified members of the government acting like it was time for a 1960s sit-in. I'm like, what? It's like, you guys were elected because you're capable of writing laws. And you're not supposed to do that in Congress. You're supposed to say stuff in Congress. You were elected to say what can't be articulated by your constituents. That's what you're supposed to do. It takes a lot of calories to believe people that pull stunts like that, and that the very worldview their ridiculous stunt is coming from is credible. I just wish people would represent themselves better. I wish life wasn't about debasing itself. We at General Motors are fighting your battle for if the CIO beats us. Then you're next in line and there will be no stopping them. Now we are willing to let the CIO sit in at Chevrolet until hell freezes and suffer that loss in our profits. If you will hold your production of Fords and Plymouths, the price class competitors to the Chevrolet, to your present market. On the other hand, we cannot hold out against the CIO. If you boost production in order to sell to all potential Chevrolet customers who will buy your product because they cannot get Chevrolets, and then Lewis, who was an organizational genius with a rare insight into the power mechanics of the status quo, dismissed it with a perceptive comment. It doesn't matter whether this is a false rumor or true, he said, because neither Ford nor Chrysler could ever agree to overlook an opportunity for an immediate increase in their profits and power, short-sighted as it might be. The internecine struggle among the haves for their individual self-interests is as short-sighted as internecine struggles among the have-nots. I have, on occasion, remarked that I feel confident that I could persuade a millionaire on a Friday to subsidize a revolution for Saturday, out of which he would make a huge profit on Sunday, even though he was certain to be executed on Monday. The haves don't know how the fuck they are the haves. There's this great illusion that most people that are in good places in their lives understand how the hell they are actually there, other than they went to school and they were obedient and they got lots of reinforcement that they're doing the right thing from everybody along the step of the way, but they never quite put it together other than just fitting into certain things in society, right? And People have a right to find everything that they need without having to participate in other person's cultures. Companies are cultures. They have a cultural attitude. This is why people got fired, not because they were enemies of the ideas of Charlie Kirk. It's because on a baseline of civil discourse in a society that everybody enjoys, right? Because up to that moment, she was part of a society she was enjoying. It was a shock to her because probably people were treating her the way they would treat any other human being, and not because, she was a person of color or ideologically woke or whatever. But, straight up shows that there's bloodlust in her heart. That's, you have freedom of speech. Thank you for telling us that we're not safe around you. You have used your freedom of speech to let people know who you are. Freedom of speech is working perfectly. Once one understands this internal battle for power within the status quo, one can begin to appraise effective tactics to exploit it. And by the way, listen, the right answer to everything will never fit on a bumper sticker. The right answer cannot be condensed into E equals MC squared. It's not possible. It's insulting to the details. Don't be so arrogant that you can find your rhetoric catchphrase, and that's the magic word that shuts down an argument. The winning of an argument is earned in the battlefield of the discourse, and dealing with the personal attacks, not complaining about them, but exploiting them to force them to get back on the issue. Because the personal attacks are irrelevant, because he's trying to make a straw man out of you. An example is to be found just a couple of years ago when, during the height of the rising tide of the struggle for civil rights, certain civil rights leaders in Chicago declared a Christmas boycott on all the department stores downtown. The boycott was a disastrous failure, and any experienced revolutionary could have predicted without any reservations that this would have been the case. Any attack against the status quo must use the strength of the enemy against itself. Let us examine this particular boycott. The error was in trying to boycott all instead of some. Few liberals, white or black, would forego all Christmas shopping in the most attractive shopping places, even if it had not been the Christmas season. We know that picket lines are relatively ineffective today in stopping the general population. There is a low degree of identification on the part of the general population with the labor movement or with picket lines in general. However, even that low degree can be exploited by placing a picket line in front of only one department store. If the same merchandise can be purchased at the same price at another department store across the street, the slight uneasiness that the picket line creates can affect a significant number of customers. They have an easy enough, visible enough alternative. They will cross the street. The power squeeze comes when the picketed department store sees a number of customers going across to its competitor. Right. So, it's trying to use capitalism against itself, which is actually not possible. It's just the way it is. It's already designed that way. You can go ahead and attack a business. Supply and demand is what is bringing things in, not your attack on the business, right? Of course, there's the problem of looting, and then looting will change the whole equation, because at that point you're not competing anymore. And looting has been a great deal of what we've been dealing with. Looting has been allegedly the level of tactic, and that somehow, hey, look, I don't know. Let it be its thing. Let the stores give people, let them just take it. Because you know what? I've always heard that cost could be covered. Maybe let's put that to the test. Prove that it exists, that the cost is already covered. Okay. This calculated maneuvering of the power of one part of the haves against its other parts is central to strategy. In a certain sense, it is similar to the have-not nations playing off the USA against the USSR. The basic tactic in warfare against the haves is a mass political jujitsu. The have-nots do not rigidly oppose the haves, but yield in such planned and skilled ways that the superior strength of the haves become their own undoing. For example, since the haves publicly pose as the custodians of responsibility, morality, law, and justice, which are frequently strangers to each other, they can be constantly pushed to live up to their own book of morality and regulations. No organization, including organized religion, can live up to the letter of its own book. You can club them to death with their book of rules and regulations. This is what the great revolutionary Paul of Tarsus knew when he wrote to the Corinthians. Who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth. Let us take the example, the case of the civil rights demonstration of '63 in Birmingham. When thousands of Negro children stayed out of school to participate in the street demonstrations, the Birmingham Board of Education dusted off its book of regulations and threatened to expel all children absent for this reason. Here the civil rights leaders erred, as they did on other vital tactics, by backing off instead of rushing in with more demonstrations and pressing the Birmingham Board of Education between the pages of their books of regulations by forcing them to live up to the letter of their regulations and statements. The board and the city of Birmingham would have been in an impossible situation with every Negro child expelled and loose on the streets. If they didn't reverse themselves before they acted, they would have reversed themselves one day later. Right, well, it's not so much that they're loose on the streets, but it's so much that, they are actually going to be loose on the streets. Because, parental situations. And at that period of time, I'm not exactly sure what the incarceration rate in the black family unit was. Were dads starting to trend upwards in prison? Another dramatic failure to failure to understand tactics came during the second Chicago public school boycott of '64, a struggle against the de facto segregated public school system. We know that the Efficacy of any action is in the reaction it evokes from the haves, so that the cycle escalates in a continuum of conflict, lacking any reaction from the haves except public notice of the numbers of children involved. Effects of the boycott were significantly over by the next day. This boycott was what I call a terminal tactic, one that crests, breaks, and disappears like a wave. Terminal tactics do not arouse the reaction that is essential for the development of a conflict. A terminal tactic is to be exercised only to finish a conflict, for it is ineffective in the development of the rhythm of give and take that one must have while stepping up the war and building the movement. Civil rights leaders could console themselves with the psychological carryovers, public display of support, and similar prayerful hopes, but as for carrying on the conflict for integration, that was over and done with by the next day, nice memory. In Chicago, the haves slipped badly when both a judge and a district attorney muttered that the Book of Regulations banned attempts to induce the absence of public school students and growled ominously about an injunction against all civil, Freudian slip, rights. Leaders taking part in the development of the boycott hear always, whenever the haves start living by their book, they present a golden opportunity to the have-nots to transform what had been a terminal tactic into a sweeping advance on many fronts. The children wouldn't need to be absent. The leaders would be the only people who needed to act. Now was the time to start an intensive campaign of ridicule, insults, and taunting defiance, daring the district attorney and the judge either to live up to their regulations and issue the injunctions or stand publicly exposed as fearful frauds who were afraid to put the law where their mouths were. Such behavior on the part of the have-nots would probably have resulted in the injunction, but by this time the boycott tactic would have had shaking consequences. Immediately following the boycott, every civil rights leader in the city of Chicago involved in it would have been in violation of the court injunction. But the last thing that the establishment wants is to indict and imprison every single civil rights leader, which would have included leaders of every religious organization in town in the city of Chicago. Such a step would have shaken the power structure of Chicago and certainly put the entire issue of school segregation policy on the line. Without any question, the district attorney and the judge would have had to depend on postponements in the hope that everybody would just forget about it. At this point now that the civil rights leaders had the powerful weapon of the Book of Laws of the Haves, they would have to stand fast publicly, once again taunting, insulting, demanding that the judge and the district attorney obey the law, charging that the district attorney and the courts had issued an injunction which they had publicly, willfully, and maliciously violated, and that they therefore must be compelled to pay the penalties for this action. If the civil rights leaders insisted that they be arrested and tried, the haves would be on the run and in complete confusion, caught in the straitjacket on their own book. Hang on a second. Okay. Just want to see how far this goes down until the next thing. Time in tactics might be the right spot to note, but I'm not going to read that far. Yeah, I'm going to keep it short today. I want to have a little bit of downtime before my thing. So we're going to read a little bit more, a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to call it. Enforcement of their injunction would have resulted in a citywide storm of protests and a rapid growth in the organization. Non-enforcement would have signaled a breakdown and retreat of the haves from the have-nots, and also resulted in swelling in the size and force of the have-not organization. The reaction of the status quo in jailing revolutionary leaders is in itself a tremendous contribution to the development of the have-not movement, as well as to the personal development of the revolutionary leaders. This point should be carefully remembered as another example of how mass jiu-jitsu tactics can be used to so maneuver the status quo that it turns its power against itself. Jailing the revolutionary leaders and their followers performs 3 vital functions for the cause of the have-nots. 1. It is an act on the part of the status quo that in itself points up the conflict between the haves and the have-nots. It strengthens immeasurably the position of the revolutionary leader with their people by surrounding the jailed leadership with an aura of martyrdom. It deepens the identification of the leadership with their people, since the prevalent reaction among the have-nots is that their leadership cares so much for them and is so sincere, committed to the issue, that it is willing to suffer imprisonment for the cause. Repeatedly in situations where the relationship between the have-nots and their leaders has become strained, the remedy has been the jailing of the leaders by the establishment. Immediately the ranks close and the leaders regain their mass support. I'm going to read this whole big passage, and that's going to be the end of it for the day. At the same time, the revolutionary leaders should make certain that their publicized violations of the regulations are so selected that their jail terms are relatively brief, from 1 day to 2 months. The trouble with a long jail sentence is that a revolutionary is removed from action for such an extended period. Yeah, Saul. That's the whole point. That's the whole fucking point. This gets into serious questions about, when you see how foolish Saul wants to be with how he's leading people, it practically begs you for the need for government. Right? Under the assumption that he's going after people that have undeserved wealth. And only going after people that he says has undeserved wealth, merely because there's an angry mob of hungry people that would like their place at the dinner table. Are relatively brief. Sentence that a revolutionary removed from action for such an extended period of time that he loses touch. And if you are if you are gone long enough, everybody forgets about you. Life goes on. New issues arise and new leaders appear. However, a periodic removal from circulation by being jailed is an essential element in the development of the revolutionary. The one problem that the revolutionary cannot cope with by himself is that he must now and then have an opportunity to reflect and synthesize his thoughts, to gain that privacy in which he can try to make sense out of what he is doing, why he is doing it, where he is going, and what has been wrong with what he has done. See, at least he is telling you to start, at least here's some shadow work. All right, at least this. At least he does say this. Because certainly I did. What he should have done, and above all, to see the relationship of all the episodes and acts they tie into, a general pattern, the most convenient and accessible solution is jail. It is here that he begins to develop a philosophy. It is here that he begins to shape long-term goals, intermediate goals, and self-analysis of tactics as tied to his own personality. It is here that he is emancipated from the slavery of action, wherein he was compelled to think from act to act. Now he can look at the totality of his actions and the reaction of the enemy from a fairly detached position. Every revolutionary leader of consequence has had to undergo these withdrawals from the arena of action. Without such opportunities, he goes from one tactic to another, but most of them are almost terminal tactics in themselves. I went a little bit over. That's fine. Okay. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to call it right here. And I don't think I'm working tomorrow. So I'll probably see you guys tomorrow. All right. I'll catch you later.